I am Connie, 32 years old, and until last Friday, I was the Senior IT Systems Security Manager at Meridian Tech with a spotless 6-year record. After completing a massive security upgrade that saved the company millions, my boss Robert called me into his office with HR. "You are not needed for Q4, he said with a smirk. I smiled, packed my personal items, and drove home. 2 days later, I woke up to 25 missed calls from board members frantically asking why tomorrow's product launch was locked behind security protocols only I could access. Before I continue this corporate revenge story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you have ever been undervalued at work, and stay tuned to see how I turned being not needed into the biggest power move of my career. My journey into cybersecurity began 12 years ago, when I discovered my natural talent for understanding complex systems. I earned my bachelor's degree in computer science, followed by a master's in cybersecurity from MIT. By 24, I had collected an impressive array of certifications, CISP, CEH, CISM, and several specialized security credentials that made me highly sought after in the industry. When Meridian Tech recruited me 6 years ago, they were a promising mid-sized company with ambitious growth plans, but severely outdated security infrastructure. I remember my interview with the CTO, who practically begged me to join after seeing my portfolio. "We need someone who can build us a fortress," he had said. I was excited by the challenge and the opportunity to create security protocols from the ground up. My work ethic has always been impeccable. I typically arrived at 7:30 in the morning and rarely left before 7 at night. Weekends were often spent reviewing security logs or researching emerging threats. I dedicated myself to protecting Meridian's data and systems with the same fervor others reserve for their children or prized possessions. Within my first year, I had completely overhauled their security infrastructure. I implemented multiple authentication layers, created robust backup systems, established rigorous access controls, and developed proprietary encryption protocols specifically tailored to our needs. The board was impressed enough to approve my budget requests without hesitation, a rare victory in corporate America. My immediate supervisor, Robert Dalton, was a different story. In his 50s, with thinning hair and an expanding waistline, Robert was a relic from the company's early days. His technical knowledge had stagnated somewhere around 2005, but his political maneuvering skills remained razor-sharp. Robert had a particular talent for presenting my work as collaborative efforts where he played a significant role. "Connie and I developed this solution," he would say, in meetings, despite having contributed nothing but obstacles. My coworkers fell into distinct categories regarding their relationships with me. Amanda from marketing quickly became a true friend. With her fiery red hair and quick laugh, she was one of the few people who truly appreciated the importance of my work. "Without you, this place would have been hacked 10 times over," she often told me over our weekly lunch dates. She was the one who first noticed and warned me about Robert's increasingly territorial behavior. Trevor from the IT support team was more complicated. A talented technician with a nervous disposition, he frequently needed my help troubleshooting complex security issues. We maintained a cordial professional relationship, but I always sensed his primary loyalty was to Robert, who had hired him 8 years ago. Trevor often acted as Robert's eyes and ears in the department, reporting back conversations and developments. Then there was Diane Winters, one of the more tech-savvy board members. In her early 60s, with impeccable silver hair and sharp blue eyes, she had built and sold 2 tech companies before joining Meridian's board. Diane always made a point to speak with me directly during quarterly presentations, asking insightful questions that demonstrated her genuine understanding of cybersecurity challenges. She was one of the few leadership figures who consistently acknowledged my contributions without prompting. 6 months before my dismissal, I began leading our most ambitious project, yet a complete security overhaul to prepare for our expansion into financial technology services. This project required rebuilding our security architecture from the foundation up to meet stringent regulatory requirements. I designed a multi-layered system with advanced encryption, real-time threat detection, and automated response protocols. The project was my proudest professional achievement, elegant in its design yet virtually impenetrable. The final phase was scheduled for implementation 3 weeks after I was dismissed. This phase contained the most sensitive and complex elements of the system, including proprietary authentication protocols that I had personally developed. I was particularly excited about the biometric verification system I had designed, which would eliminate many common security vulnerabilities. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs in Robert's behavior. About 3 weeks before my dismissal, his demeanor toward me changed subtly. His normally dismissive attitude transformed into something more calculating. He began asking unusually detailed questions about my security implementations and documentation processes. At the time, I attributed this to the approaching final phase and the board's natural interest in our progress. I was wrong. Catastrophically wrong. The first warning sign appeared approximately 2 months before my dismissal. Robert began excluding me from meetings directly related to my own security project. When I questioned him about this, he deflected with vague responses about streamlining communication channels and reducing meeting bloat. I accepted these explanations initially, focusing instead on the technical aspects of my work rather than office politics. "Connie, did you know there was a security steering committee meeting yesterday?" Amanda asked one Wednesday afternoon, stopping by my desk with a concerned expression. "I saw it on Robert's calendar when I was scheduling the marketing presentation." I froze, my fingers hovering above my keyboard. "That is impossible. I am the head of security implementation. There cannot be a security steering committee meeting without me." Amanda's expression confirmed what I already knew: I had been deliberately excluded. This pattern continued and expanded. Meetings I would normally lead were rescheduled without my knowledge. Decision emails suddenly omitted my address from the recipient list. My direct reports began receiving instructions that conflicted with my directives. Around the same time, Trevor began asking increasingly detailed questions about my security protocols. This was unusual, as Trevor typically focused on user support rather than back-end security architecture. "Can you walk me through the authentication sequence again?" he asked one afternoon, notepad in hand, "and maybe explain how the recovery protocols function if primary authentication fails." "Why do you need to know this, Trevor?" I asked, my suspicion growing. "This is well outside your daily responsibilities." "Robert asked me to get up to speed on some of the security systems," he replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "Just for backup purposes." The most alarming development came 6 weeks before my dismissal, when Robert hired his nephew Brian as an IT consultant. Brian was 26 with an undergraduate degree in business administration and a 6-month coding bootcamp as his sole technical qualification. His responsibilities were nebulous at best, described as technical integration and security assessment. Brian began shadowing me in meetings, asking for copies of my documentation and requesting detailed explanations of systems he clearly did not have the background to understand. When I expressed concerns about sharing sensitive security information with someone who lacked proper clearance or qualifications, Robert dismissed my concerns. "Brian is family," he said with a wave of his hand, "and he has been cleared by HR. I need him to understand our systems for a special project." Amanda confirmed my growing suspicions during one of our lunch meetings. "I overheard Robert talking to the CFO about restructuring the IT department," she said, keeping her voice low despite the busy restaurant around us. "He specifically mentioned reducing redundancies in the security team." I nearly choked on my salad. "Redundancies? I am the entire security team. The other 3 members are junior analysts I have been training." Amanda reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I think you need to prepare for something, Connie. This does not feel right." Taking her warning seriously, I began methodically documenting all of my work and contributions. This was actually a habit I had developed early in my career after being burned at my first job, where a colleague had claimed credit for my code. Every night before leaving, I updated my personal work log with detailed descriptions of my daily accomplishments, challenges addressed, and solutions implemented. I also maintained meticulous documentation of all security systems I had designed. These documents lived on the company servers, but I had created an encrypted backup system accessible only with my credentials. This was standard practice in high-level security positions, ensuring that critical information remained accessible in emergency situations. What was not standard practice was the additional security measure I had implemented in our most recent update, a transfer protocol that required my biometric verification for certain critical system changes. This was actually a security best practice I had recommended in our last board presentation designed to prevent unauthorized system modifications. The board had enthusiastically approved this measure, seeing it as an additional safeguard for our most sensitive data. What they did not realize was that I had already implemented it with myself as the authorized biometric authenticator. The day before my dismissal, Robert called me into his office for what he described as a quick administrative chat. His office always struck me as performatively impressive, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown and expensive minimalist furniture that seemed designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. "Connie, I need you to compile a complete list of all passwords and access codes for our security systems," he said, not looking up from his computer, "including your personal authentication credentials. Email them to me by end of day." The request immediately triggered alarm bells. May I ask why? That would violate several of our security protocols, not to mention industry best practices. Robert finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Just some standard documentation the board has requested, nothing to worry about." I knew he was lying. The board would never request unsecured transmission of authentication credentials, especially not via email. This directly contradicted the security policies I had established with their approval. "I will need that request in writing with board approval documented," I replied calmly. "As you know, our security protocols prohibit sharing authentication credentials through unsecured channels." Robert's expression darkened momentarily before he forced a smile. "Of course. I will get that to you tomorrow. Just a formality." I left his office with a growing sense of dread. That night, I backed up all my personal notes and documentation to my secured private cloud storage and prepared for what I suspected might be coming. I had no idea how soon my suspicions would be confirmed. The next morning started deceptively normal. I arrived at 7:15, made my usual cup of green tea, and settled in to review security logs from the overnight monitoring system. At 9:30, I received a calendar invitation from Robert for a 10 o'clock meeting in the small conference room next to HR. The subject line simply read strategic discussion, but the location told me everything I needed to know. I spent the next 30 minutes organizing my digital files, ensuring my documentation was complete, and mentally preparing for what was about to happen. At precisely 9:58, I walked calmly to the conference room, my back straight and my expression neutral. Robert was already there, along with Jessica from HR, a thin woman with perpetually worried eyes who always seemed uncomfortable during confrontations. A folder with papers sat neatly in front of the empty chair, clearly intended for me. "Connie, please have a seat," Robert said with false cheerfulness. "This should not take long." I sat down, folded my hands on the table, and waited silently. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Jessica cleared her throat, and Robert finally continued. "We have been reviewing our departmental structure and requirements for the upcoming quarter." He began using the royal we that I had always found irritating. "After careful consideration of our goals and resources, we have determined that your position will not be needed for Q4. We are going in a different direction with our security implementations." He paused, clearly expecting me to react emotionally. When I remained silent, he shifted awkwardly in his seat before continuing. "Your employment is being terminated effective immediately. Jessica has prepared the standard separation papers." He slid the folder toward me. "We will need you to hand over all company property, including your laptop and security badges. Most importantly, we need all passwords and access codes for the security systems you have been managing." Jessica spoke up in a quiet voice. "We have prepared a document listing all systems requiring access credentials." She pushed a printed spreadsheet toward me with dozens of systems listed in rows. "I see. I said, opening the folder and skimming the separation agreement. It was standard boilerplate language, offering 2 weeks of severance pay in exchange for immediate departure and a release of claims against the company. And the reason for my termination: my performance reviews have all been excellent. Robert waved dismissively. This is not performance related. As I said, we are restructuring, and your position is simply not needed. Brian will be taking over the security implementation moving forward. That confirmed everything. Robert had orchestrated my removal to install his woefully unqualified nephew in my position, likely at a fraction of my salary. I carefully kept my expression neutral as fury and vindication battled within me. I understand, I said, signing the termination papers, but deliberately avoiding the section requesting password documentation. Regarding systems access, I am legally obligated to remind you that sharing authentication credentials in this manner violates several security protocols that the board approved last quarter. I would be happy to transfer access properly through the secure channel we established for exactly this purpose. Robert's face flushed slightly. That will not be necessary. Just write down the passwords and access codes here. He tapped the spreadsheet impatiently. I cannot do that in good conscience, I replied calmly. It would violate both company policy and industry regulations. The proper procedure is to reset administrative access through the Secure Authentication Transfer Protocol. I can initiate that process before I leave. Jessica looked increasingly uncomfortable, glancing between us. Perhaps we should follow the established security protocols. Robert, I am not familiar with the specific requirements, but if there are regulatory considerations— Fine, Robert snapped. Initiate whatever process is necessary, but I need full access to all systems by end of business today. I nodded, knowing that the authentication transfer protocol would indeed reset administrative access, but would also trigger certain security lockouts that could only be overridden with biometric verification. I was not sabotaging anything, merely following the exact security procedures that had been approved by the board. After signing the necessary paperwork, I returned to my desk and began the methodical process of packing my personal belongings. I took only what was truly mine: family photos, my collection of security conference badges, the small potted succulent Amanda had given me for my birthday, and a few technical books I had purchased myself. I initiated the authentication transfer protocol, which would reset administrative credentials after a 24-hour security delay, another feature approved by the board to prevent hasty access changes. I also properly logged out of all systems, ensuring everything was functioning normally at the time of my departure. As I packed, I noticed other employees watching with confused expressions. No announcement had been made about my departure, and seeing a senior manager suddenly packing up sent ripples of unease through the open office. Trevor approached, hesitantly. "Are you leaving early today?" he asked, his eyes darting to my half-empty desk. "I am leaving permanently," I replied evenly. "Robert can explain the details. You should speak with him about taking over my current projects." Trevor's face paled. "But the security implementation is nowhere near ready for handoff. There are thousands of lines of code and configurations that only you fully understand." "I am aware," I said, closing my box of belongings. "All my work is fully documented in the secure repository. Robert has initiated the access transfer protocol. What I did not mention was that properly understanding that documentation would require years of specialized knowledge that neither Trevor nor Brian possessed." By 11:30, I had completed my packing and access transfer initiation. I walked calmly to the elevator, badge in hand, ready to surrender to security at the lobby desk. Several colleagues looked up as I passed, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. Amanda caught my eye from across the room, her face showing alarm. I gave her a slight nod, silently promising to explain later. The drive home was surreal. 6 years of dedicated work ended in a 30-minute meeting. As I navigated through midday traffic, I experienced a bewildering mix of emotions: anger at Robert's transparent manipulation and betrayal, a strange sense of relief at being freed from an increasingly toxic situation, concern about finding a new position, but underneath it all, a quiet confidence that I had done nothing wrong and had protected both myself and the company's systems by following proper protocols. At home, I placed my box of belongings on the kitchen counter and changed into comfortable clothes. I made a conscious decision not to check my work email or phone for at least 48 hours. I needed time to process what had happened and consider my options rationally without the emotional whirlwind of the immediate aftermath. That first afternoon and evening passed quietly. I ordered takeout, watched a mindless movie, and went to bed early. The next day I slept in, went for a long run, and spent the afternoon updating my resume. My phone remained unusually silent, which surprised me somewhat given the critical nature of the security systems I had been managing. By the second evening, I began to wonder if perhaps Robert had somehow managed to untangle my security protocols after all. Then came the morning of day 3, when everything changed. I woke at 6:30 out of habit, reaching for my phone to check the time. The screen was filled with notifications, 25 missed calls, 37 text messages, and over 40 urgent emails. Most of the calls had come between midnight and 5 in the morning from numbers I did not recognize, though several were from Diane Winters and other board members I had presented to, but never spoken with directly. The text messages ranged from professionally concerned to openly panicked. "Connie, this is Diane Winters. Please call me immediately regarding access issues with the Mercury project. Need urgent assistance with security protocols. Systems locked down. Call as soon as possible. This is Board Chairman Phillips. Critical situation developing. Require your expertise immediately." The emails contained increasingly detailed descriptions of technical problems. All attempts to access the core security infrastructure have triggered lockout protocols. The backup systems have gone into protection mode following multiple failed access attempts. Critical client data has become inaccessible ahead of tomorrow's product launch. I sat up in bed, fully awake now, scanning through the messages with a mixture of vindication and professional concern. While part of me felt a certain satisfaction that my security systems were performing exactly as designed, my professional integrity was troubled by the potential business impact. The most revealing message came from Amanda. "Robert told everyone you quit unexpectedly yesterday with no notice. He claimed you handed over all necessary access and information before leaving. Now nothing works, and he is blaming you for sabotage. Board members are here at 7 a.m. on a Saturday, complete chaos. Call me." So that was Robert's play. He had told everyone I had quit without notice, rather than admitting he had fired me, and claimed I had properly transferred all access, setting me up to take the fall when the inevitable technical problems emerged. It was manipulative, but predictable. I decided to call Diane Winters first, as she had always treated me with respect and was likely to give me a fair hearing. She answered on the first ring. "Connie, thank you for returning my call," she said, her voice tense but controlled. "We have a situation here that requires your immediate assistance." "I understand there are access issues," I replied neutrally. "May I ask what specifically is happening?" "Every critical system is locked down. The security protocol is requesting biometric verification that none of us can provide. Robert assured us yesterday that all necessary access had been transferred before you left, but clearly that is not the case. The product launch scheduled for tomorrow is in jeopardy." I took a deep breath. "Diane, I think there has been a misunderstanding about the circumstances of my departure. I did not quit. I was terminated by Robert yesterday morning and was specifically told my position was not needed for Q4. I initiated the standard authentication transfer protocol as required by our security policies, but that protocol includes a 24-hour security delay and requires proper biometric verification to complete." There was a long silence on the line. When Diane spoke again, her voice had a dangerous edge. "You were terminated," Robert told the board. "You had resigned without notice in the middle of our most critical security implementation." "That is not accurate," I said carefully. "I have the termination papers with his signature. I was explicitly told that Brian would be taking over my security responsibilities. Brian, Robert's nephew, the consultant with no security credentials. Diane's voice had risen slightly. Connie, we need your help resolving this situation. The board is convening an emergency meeting in 1 hour. Can you join remotely to help us understand what is happening? Of course, I replied. I will make myself available to assist in any way that is appropriate. Should I expect Robert to be present at this meeting? Everyone is going to be at this meeting, Diane said grimly. I will send you the connection details immediately. After ending the call, I took a quick shower and changed into professional attire, even though I would be joining remotely. I reviewed my documentation of the dismissal meeting and gathered all relevant information about the security systems in question. I was determined to remain professional and factual, regardless of how Robert might try to spin the situation. At exactly 8 o'clock, I connected to the emergency board meeting. The video showed a tense conference room filled with board members, executives, and IT staff. Robert sat near the head of the table, his face flushed and expression defensive. Trevor huddled nearby, looking terrified. Brian was nowhere to be seen. Board Chairman Phillips, a severe-looking man in his 60s, opened the meeting. Thank you all for joining on such short notice. As you know, we are facing a critical access issue that is threatening tomorrow's product launch. Connie, thank you for making yourself available. We need to understand exactly what has happened and how we can resolve it immediately. Before I could speak, Robert jumped in. With all due respect, Chairman, I think it is inappropriate to include Connie in this discussion. She abruptly resigned 2 days ago and appears to have deliberately sabotaged our systems before leaving. I remained silent, letting his accusation hang in the air. Diane Winters spoke up. Actually, Robert, Connie has informed me that she did not resign. She states that you terminated her employment and told her she was not needed for Q4. Is that accurate? All eyes turned to Robert, who shifted uncomfortably. There seems to be a misunderstanding about the nature of our discussion. I merely suggested we might be restructuring, and she overreacted by clearing out her desk. I have the termination papers with your signature, I said calmly, holding up the document to the camera, and I believe the meeting with Jessica from HR was recorded as part of standard protocol. I would be happy to waive any confidentiality concerns regarding that recording. The room erupted into murmurs as board members exchanged glances. Chairman Phillips raised a hand for silence. Let us focus on the immediate technical issue first. Connie, can you explain why our systems are locked down and what is needed to restore access? I nodded. When any senior security manager leaves the company, our protocols require a secure authentication transfer to protect sensitive systems. This protocol, which was approved by the board last quarter, includes a 24-hour security delay and requires biometric verification from the authorized security administrator to complete the transfer. This is to prevent unauthorized access changes. And you are the only authorized administrator? Phillips asked. For the core security infrastructure, yes. This was explicitly approved in the security design that was presented to and accepted by the board 6 months ago. The presentation slide specifically noted that biometric verification would be limited to the senior security administrator to prevent unauthorized access. Robert interrupted again. This is absurd. She deliberately set up the system to make herself indispensable. It is a form of corporate blackmail. Diane fixed him with a cold stare. The board approved this security architecture, Robert. You yourself presented it as an essential security feature when we were discussing regulatory compliance. I remained silent, letting the board connect the dots themselves. The simple fact, I continued after a moment, is that the authentication transfer protocol was initiated as required, but the biometric verification step was never completed because I was escorted from the building immediately after initiating the process. No one contacted me to complete the transfer, and I was explicitly told my services were no longer needed. The board members exchanged troubled glances as the full picture emerged. Chairman Phillips leaned forward. Connie, what would be required to restore access at this point? I would need to provide biometric verification through the secure authentication portal. This can be done remotely, but requires specific security tokens that only I possess. Once verification is complete, administrative access can be properly transferred to whomever the board designates as the new security administrator. And how quickly can this be accomplished? The verification process takes approximately 30 minutes. The full transfer of administrative rights would require an additional 2 to 3 hours depending on the technical qualifications of the designated recipient. Chairman Phillips nodded. Please stand by while the board discusses this matter privately. We will return to you shortly. My video feed was moved to a virtual waiting room. I sat patiently knowing that the board was now fully aware of what had actually occurred. After approximately 20 minutes, my feed was restored to the main meeting room. The atmosphere had visibly changed. Robert was still present but had been moved to a seat at the far end of the table. His expression was thunderous. Chairman Phillips addressed me directly. Connie, the board would like to proceed with the authentication verification immediately to restore system access. We can discuss the circumstances of your departure afterward. Is that acceptable? Of course, I replied. I am prepared to begin the verification process immediately. The verification process proceeded smoothly. I entered my security tokens, provided the necessary biometric authentication through my secure home system, and guided the IT team through the initial access restoration. Throughout this process, I maintained a strictly professional demeanor, focusing solely on the technical requirements rather than the political situation unfolding in the background. Once the critical systems were accessible again, Chairman Phillips called for a 10-minute break before reconvening to address personnel matters. During this break, Amanda texted me, "Robert is furious. Board members are talking in corners and giving him death glares. What did you say to them?" I replied simply, "Only the truth, backed by documentation." When the meeting resumed, the board had clearly made some decisions. Chairman Phillips began formally. Now that our immediate technical crisis has been addressed, we need to discuss how this situation occurred and how to prevent similar issues in the future. Connie, could you please explain exactly what happened 2 days ago when you left the company? I provided a factual, unemotional account of my dismissal meeting with Robert and Jessica, including Robert's statement that I was not needed for Q4 and that Brian would be taking over my security responsibilities. I explained the proper security transfer protocols I had initiated and the authentication requirements that were part of our board-approved security architecture. I have documentation of everything I have described, I concluded, including the termination papers signed by Robert and a recording of the dismissal meeting, which is legal in this state as a one-party consent jurisdiction. Robert erupted. "This is outrageous. She is clearly attempting to extort the company by holding our security systems hostage." Chairman Phillips silenced him with a gesture. "Robert, you told this board that Connie had resigned without notice and had properly transferred all access before leaving. That is clearly not what happened. You terminated a key security person in the middle of a critical implementation without any transition plan or proper understanding of the security architecture your own department had put in place." Robert attempted to deflect. Brian was fully prepared to take over the security functions. The systems were unnecessarily complicated and clearly designed to make Connie indispensable. This is a case of deliberate sabotage. At this point, Trevor unexpectedly spoke up. "That is not true, sir. I worked directly with both Connie and Brian. Brian has no understanding of the security architecture. When I tried to explain the basics to him yesterday, he could not grasp even fundamental concepts. The security systems are not unnecessarily complicated. They are industry-standard protocols, implemented exactly as specified in our regulatory compliance requirements." The room went silent as all eyes turned to Trevor, who was visibly shaking but continued. "Connie documented everything meticulously. The problem is not the documentation or the systems. The problem is that Brian does not have the technical knowledge to understand either one." Robert's face went from red to purple. "You are fired. Trevor, clean out your desk immediately." Actually, Robert, you do not have the authority to terminate anyone at this moment, Diane Winters said coldly. The board is currently reviewing all recent personnel decisions. Chairman Phillips nodded agreement. Connie, from a technical perspective, what would be required to properly manage the security systems you designed? The senior security administrator would need at minimum a master's level education in cybersecurity or equivalent field, 5 years of experience, implementing similar systems and specific certification in the encryption and authentication protocols we utilize. These requirements were outlined in the original project scope that the board approved. And does Brian meet any of these qualifications? I am not familiar with Brian's complete resume, I replied diplomatically, but based on the information I was given, he has a bachelor's degree in business administration and recently completed a 6-month coding boot camp. Several board members actually gasped. The CTO, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. That is completely inadequate. We might as well put an intern in charge of nuclear launch codes. Chairman Phillips turned to Robert. Why would you terminate our senior security expert and attempt to replace her with someone so obviously unqualified, particularly ahead of our major product launch? Robert squirmed visibly. It was a budgetary decision. Security costs were running too high, and I identified an opportunity to reduce expenses while maintaining adequate coverage. By hiring your nephew at what salary? Diane asked pointedly. Robert mumbled something inaudible. Speak up, please, Chairman Phillips demanded. $60,000 annually, plus benefits, Robert finally admitted. Another murmur ran through the room. My salary had been $160,000 appropriate for my qualifications and responsibilities. So you jeopardized a product launch representing potentially hundreds of millions in revenue to save $100,000 by replacing a qualified expert with your unqualified nephew, the CFO, spoke for the first time, her voice icy with controlled rage. Robert had no response. Chairman Phillips turned back to me. Connie, the board needs to discuss this situation privately. Could you remain available for the next hour in case we have additional questions? Of course, I agreed, and was moved back to the virtual waiting room. This time, the wait was longer, nearly 45 minutes. I used the time to prepare for various possible outcomes. When my video feed was restored to the main room, I noticed immediately that Robert was no longer present. The atmosphere seemed lighter somehow, though still serious. Thank you for your patience, Connie, Chairman Phillips began. The board has made several decisions that we would like to discuss with you. First, we have determined that your termination was improper and unauthorized. Robert did not have board approval to eliminate your position, particularly given the critical nature of the security implementation in progress. I nodded, but remained silent, waiting to hear where this was going. We would like to offer you the opportunity to return to Meridian Tech effective immediately. Given the circumstances, we believe a significant adjustment in both your title and compensation would be appropriate. What exactly are you proposing? I asked carefully. We would like you to return as Director of Information Security, reporting directly to the CTO rather than to Robert. Your compensation would be increased to reflect both the promotion and the inconvenience of recent events. We are prepared to offer $180,000 annually, plus an immediate bonus of $20,000 for resolving today's crisis. It was a generous offer, a $20,000 raise, plus a substantial bonus. But after everything that had happened, I was not sure. Simply returning to a slightly better version of my previous position was the right move. I had leverage now, and I intended to use it. I appreciate the offer, I said thoughtfully, but I would need to consider several factors before making a decision. What will happen with the current security implementation, and what is Robert's status going forward? Diane Winters answered. Robert has been placed on administrative leave pending a full review of his management decisions. As for the security implementation, that is precisely why we need you back immediately. The product launch has been delayed by 72 hours to ensure all security protocols are properly in place. I nodded, considering my position carefully. Before I can give you an answer, I would need clarity on a few points. First, what authority would I have over security implementations and staffing? Second, what oversight role would Robert have if he returns from administrative leave? And third, what guarantees do I have against similar arbitrary termination in the future? The board members exchanged glances, clearly not having anticipated such specific questions. Chairman Phillips leaned forward. Those are reasonable concerns. Let us address them directly. First, as Director of Information Security, you would have final authority over all security implementations, protocols, and related staffing decisions, subject only to board and CTO approval for budgetary matters. Second, regardless of the outcome of Robert's review, he would have no oversight role regarding security functions. If he remains with the company, it would be in a different capacity. Third, your new employment contract would include specific protections against termination, without cause requiring board approval for any change in your employment status. I maintained a neutral expression, but internally I was pleased with these responses. Still, I decided to press my advantage further. Those assurances are helpful. However, given recent events and the critical nature of the security architecture I developed, I believe a more significant role would be appropriate. I would be prepared to return under the following conditions. First, as Chief Information Security Officer, a C-suite position, reporting directly to the CEO with a seat on the Technology Steering Committee. Second, at a salary of $230,000 annually, which is market rate for a CISO with my qualifications. Third, full recognition and credit for the security system design I developed, including in all external marketing and compliance documentation. I could see shock register on several faces at my counteroffer. The salary I proposed was a $70,000 increase from their offer, and the title elevation would place me in the executive leadership team. It was bold, perhaps even audacious, but I knew my worth and the leverage I currently held. Chairman Phillips cleared his throat. That is a significant adjustment to our proposal. The board would need to discuss these terms. The financial aspects alone would require CFO input and budget revisions. I understand, I replied calmly. However, I should note that tomorrow's product launch remains contingent on proper security implementation. While I have restored basic access, the final security protocols for the financial technology services still require expert implementation. Additionally, I am already receiving inquiries from other companies interested in my availability. That last part was a slight exaggeration, but not entirely untrue. My phone had begun receiving LinkedIn messages and emails from recruiters within hours of updating my status. The CFO leaned over to whisper something to Chairman Phillips, who nodded slowly. Connie, your expertise is clearly valuable to Meridian, particularly at this critical juncture. The board needs to confer privately on your proposal. Could you give us 30 minutes? Of course, I agreed, and was again placed in the virtual waiting room. This time, I used the break to research current CISO salaries at comparable companies, confirming that my request was indeed reasonable, if at the higher end of the range. I also drafted a brief outline of the immediate steps needed to complete the security implementation for the product launch as a demonstration of my continued professional commitment despite the circumstances. When I was readmitted to the meeting, I noticed several new faces had joined, including the CEO who had been traveling internationally during this crisis. His presence signaled the seriousness with which my counteroffer was being taken. Chairman Phillips addressed me with newfound respect. Connie, after careful consideration, the board has decided to accept your terms with minor adjustments. We are prepared to appoint you as Chief Information Security Officer, reporting to the CEO with a seat on the Technology Steering Committee. Your salary will be $220,000 annually, with a performance review in 6 months that could increase that to the requested $230,000. You will receive full credit for your security architecture in all appropriate contexts. Additionally, we are prepared to offer a signing bonus of $30,000 in recognition of recent events. Are these terms acceptable? They had essentially met my demands with only a slight modification to the salary that actually included a pathway to my requested amount. The additional signing bonus was an unexpected sweetener. Those terms are acceptable, I agreed. I can begin immediately to ensure the product launch proceeds successfully. The relief in the room was palpable. The CEO spoke for the first time. Excellent! Welcome back, Connie. Or should I say, welcome to the executive team. I look forward to working directly with you to ensure Meridian's security infrastructure remains world-class. As the meeting wrapped up with discussions of immediate next steps, I noticed Trevor giving me a subtle thumbs up from his corner of the conference room. Amanda had already texted, "Holy promotion, Batman drinks are on you tonight." I allowed myself a small smile, the first genuine one since this ordeal began. In less than 72 hours, I had gone from being dismissed as not needed to becoming a C-suite executive with significantly increased compensation and authority. The power had shifted dramatically, and I intended to use it wisely. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of activity as I worked to salvage the product launch while simultaneously negotiating the details of my new position. My first priority was completing the security implementation that had been interrupted by my dismissal. I worked remotely at first, guiding the IT team through the complex final phase of the security architecture. Trevor proved invaluable during this period. Free from Robert's intimidating presence, he demonstrated a much deeper understanding of the security systems than he had previously let on. "I always paid attention when you explained things," he admitted during a late-night implementation session. "I just never felt confident enough to speak up with Robert around." By the end of the first day, we had restored all critical security functions and were well on our way to completing the final phase of implementation. The product launch was rescheduled for the following week, giving us adequate time to ensure every security protocol was functioning perfectly. Meanwhile, the formal negotiations regarding my new position proceeded through proper channels. The board had assigned Diane Winters as their representative, working with the company's legal team to draft my new employment agreement. I secured my own employment attorney to review the terms, determined not to leave anything to chance after my recent experience. "They are actually being quite generous," my attorney remarked after reviewing the initial draft. "The termination protections are stronger than I typically see, even for C-suite positions. They must really value your expertise or really fear losing you." "Perhaps both," I replied. The negotiation process revealed interesting dynamics within the company's leadership. While most board members seemed genuinely supportive of my promotion, a few questioned whether such a dramatic elevation was warranted. These concerns were typically raised by older board members who perhaps did not fully grasp the critical importance of cybersecurity in the modern business landscape. Diane proved to be an unexpected ally in these discussions. During one particularly contentious negotiation call, an older board member suggested that my salary request was excessive for someone of her age and experience. Diane responded coolly, "Connie single-handedly built a security architecture that meets federal banking regulations, something our competitors have spent millions on consulting firms to achieve. Her age is irrelevant, her expertise is exceptional, and her compensation request is actually below market rate for the value she provides." The most challenging aspect of the negotiations centered around the scope of my authority in the new position. I insisted on having final approval over all security-related decisions and direct control over the security team's budget. Some board members were reluctant to grant such autonomy to a newly appointed executive. "I understand the concerns," I said during a particularly tense negotiation session. "But recent events have demonstrated the risks of having security decisions made by individuals without proper technical qualifications. I am not asking for unlimited authority, only the appropriate professional control over my area of expertise." The CEO ultimately supported my position. "If we are appointing Connie as CISO, we should trust her judgment on security matters. That is precisely why we are creating this position." Throughout these negotiations, Robert remained on administrative leave, though rumors circulated about heated exchanges between him and various board members. I maintained a strictly professional stance, never mentioning him in negotiations, unless specifically asked about reporting structures. 1 week after my dismissal, the final employment agreement was ready for signatures. The terms exceeded even my initial expectations. I would assume the newly created position of Chief Information Security Officer, reporting directly to the CEO. My security team would be expanded from 4 to 8 members with a dedicated budget increase of 30%. My compensation package included a $220,000 base salary, $30,000 signing bonus stock options, and enhanced benefits. Additionally, the agreement specified that any attempt to terminate my employment would require a supermajority vote of the board, effectively preventing any single executive from repeating Robert's actions. Perhaps most satisfying was the clause explicitly recognizing my intellectual contribution to the company's security architecture. All external marketing materials, regulatory filings, and technical documentation would properly credit me as the chief architect and implementer of the security system, ensuring that Robert could never again claim credit for my work. The night before signing the agreement, I received an unexpected call from the CEO. "Connie, I wanted to personally apologize for what happened last week," he began. "I was traveling when Robert made his decision, but ultimately I am responsible for the actions of my management team. The company failed you, and I am determined that it will not happen again." "I appreciate that," I replied, genuinely touched by his personal outreach. "There is one more thing you should know before tomorrow's signing," he continued. "The board has completed its review of Robert's actions. Effective immediately, he has been removed from his position as VP of Technology Operations." I remained silent, processing this information. "He will remain with the company in an advisory capacity until year-end, but will have no management authority or involvement with the security or IT departments. I wanted you to hear this directly from me rather than through company gossip." "Thank you for telling me," I said carefully. "May I ask who will be assuming his responsibilities?" "That is actually something I hope to discuss with you. The board is considering a significant restructuring of the technology division. Your input on that reorganization would be valuable given your unique perspective on our current strengths and weaknesses." This was an unexpected opportunity, a chance to help reshape the entire technology structure of the company. "I would be happy to provide input," I replied. "I have some thoughts on how we might better align our technical resources with our strategic goals." "Excellent. Let us plan to discuss this after you have settled into your new role. For now, focus on the product launch. We are all counting on your expertise to ensure its success." After ending the call, I sat in my home office, contemplating the extraordinary reversal of fortune I had experienced in just 7 days. From being dismissed as not needed to being consulted on company-wide restructuring, it was a vindication I could scarcely have imagined a week earlier. The following morning, I signed the employment agreement in the boardroom, where just days before, I had participated remotely in the emergency meeting. Board members and executives welcomed me warmly, with Diane giving me a subtle wink as I took my seat at the executive table for the first time. As the meeting concluded, Chairman Phillips made a brief announcement. "With the formalities complete, I am pleased to officially welcome Connie as Meridian's first Chief Information Security Officer. Her expertise and leadership will be invaluable as we continue to expand our digital offerings. The board has complete confidence in her ability to protect our systems and our customers' data at the highest level." The room filled with applause, and I smiled graciously while scanning the faces around me. Some were genuinely supportive, others merely polite, but all now recognized my value to the company. It was, I reflected, a masterclass in corporate redemption, achieved not through vengeance or sabotage, but through competence, preparation, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your true worth. My first official day as Chief Information Security Officer began with a carefully orchestrated entrance. Diane had suggested I arrive with visible executive support, so I walked into the building alongside the CEO and CTO. The symbolism was not lost on anyone watching, particularly when we entered the open office area where the technology teams worked. Heads turned and conversations stopped as employees recognized the significance of my return with such prominent company leaders. Trevor was the first to approach, extending his hand formally, but with a genuine smile. "Congratulations on your promotion, Miss Williams," he said, using my last name for the first time, a small acknowledgement of my new executive status. "Thank you, Trevor," I replied warmly. "I am looking forward to working with you in this new capacity." Throughout the morning, colleagues stopped by to welcome me back and congratulate me on the promotion. Most expressed surprise at the rapid turnaround, having been told only that I had temporarily left and was now returning in an expanded role. The rumor mill had been working overtime, but few knew the complete story. Amanda arrived at my new corner office shortly before lunch, closing the door behind her before breaking into a wide grin. "From fired to C-suite in 1 week has to be some kind of corporate record," she said. "I need every detail that you can legally share." I laughed, feeling truly relaxed for the first time in days. Let us just say that proper documentation and following established protocols can sometimes save more than just data. The product launch proceeded the following week without a single security issue. The financial technology services we introduced were met with enthusiastic market response, driving our stock price up 8% in a single day. Industry analysts specifically praised the robust security features, unaware of the drama that had nearly derailed the entire project. In the weeks that followed, I gradually implemented changes to strengthen our security posture further. With my expanded team and budget, I introduced enhanced monitoring systems, additional authentication layers for critical functions, and comprehensive security training for all employees. Each improvement was meticulously documented and properly credited to the specific team members involved, establishing a culture of recognition that had been sorely lacking under Robert's leadership. Robert himself became an increasingly rare sight at the office. His advisory role kept him technically employed, but his influence had evaporated. He avoided me entirely, taking circuitous routes through the building to prevent any chance encounters. By the end of the quarter, he had stopped coming to the office altogether, working remotely until his contract expired at year-end. Trevor flourished under the new organizational structure. I promoted him to senior security analyst, recognizing the knowledge and skills he had quietly developed. "I always knew you understood more than you let on," I told him during his promotion meeting. "You just needed the right environment to demonstrate your capabilities." He nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. Robert always made me feel like I did not know enough to contribute meaningfully. It was easier to just take direction than to offer suggestions that would be dismissed. "That management style stops now," I assured him. "In my team, every voice matters, and good ideas can come from anywhere." This philosophy became the cornerstone of my leadership approach. I established regular brainstorming sessions where team members at all levels could propose security enhancements or identify potential vulnerabilities. I created clear paths for advancement based on demonstrated skills rather than office politics or personal connections. Most importantly, I ensured that credit was always given where it was due, breaking the cycle of senior managers claiming their subordinates' achievements. 3 months into my new role, Diane invited me to lunch at an upscale restaurant near the office. After some pleasant conversation about company developments, she leaned forward with a more serious expression. "I owe you an apology, Connie," she said quietly. "The board was aware of some issues with Robert's management style for quite some time. Several exit interviews had raised red flags, but we failed to take decisive action. If we had addressed those concerns earlier, you might have been spared the unnecessary drama." I appreciated her candor. "Why did the board hesitate?" I asked, genuinely curious. "The usual reasons," she sighed. "Robert had been with the company since its early days. He had personal relationships with several founding board members. His department generally met its targets even if staff turnover was high. It was easier to attribute the complaints to personality conflicts than to acknowledge a systemic leadership problem." I nodded, understanding the dynamics all too well. "And now we know better," she said firmly. "Your situation became a catalyst for broader changes. The board has implemented more rigorous management oversight and takes exit interview feedback much more seriously. We have also established clearer protocols for executive-level termination decisions, requiring proper documentation and board notification before action can be taken. Those sound like positive developments, I observed. They are, Diane agreed. Sometimes it takes a near disaster to prompt necessary change. In this case, we almost lost our most valuable security expert days before a critical product launch. That got everyone's attention in a way that gradual feedback never could. By the 1-year anniversary of my dismissal and dramatic return, Meridian had undergone significant transformation. The technology division reorganization I had helped design had streamlined operations and improved cross-departmental collaboration. Our security systems were recognized as industry-leading, helping us secure several major financial institution clients who valued our robust protection measures. My team had grown to 12 highly qualified professionals, each contributing their unique skills to our collective success. In a quiet moment of reflection in my office, I considered the extraordinary journey of the past year and the lessons it had taught me. The importance of thoroughly documenting your work had been dramatically reinforced. Had I not maintained meticulous records of my contributions and the specific security protocols I had designed, Robert's attempt to dismiss me and replace me with his unqualified nephew might have succeeded. Those records had provided irrefutable evidence of my value when it mattered most. I had also learned to truly understand my worth in the marketplace. Before the dismissal, I had been content with compensation below my market value, prioritizing the work itself over financial recognition. The crisis forced me to research industry standards and advocate for appropriate compensation, resulting in a significant improvement in my financial situation. That knowledge continued to serve me well in subsequent compensation reviews and negotiations. Perhaps the most valuable lesson was the power of remaining calm under pressure. Throughout the dismissal and subsequent chaos, I had maintained a professional demeanor, never resorting to emotional outbursts or retaliatory actions that could have undermined my position. That composure had impressed the board and executives, establishing my reputation as someone who could handle crisis situations with grace and clarity. Standing my ground had ultimately earned respect from company leadership in a way that quiet competence alone never had. By clearly articulating my value and establishing appropriate boundaries, I had reset the power dynamics and created a more equitable professional relationship. This was a lesson I now emphasized when mentoring junior team members, particularly women, who often struggled with self-advocacy in technical fields. Most fundamentally, I had learned never to settle for less than I deserved. The initial termination, painful as it was, had created an opportunity for significant professional advancement that might never have materialized otherwise. By recognizing that opportunity and boldly pursuing it rather than simply accepting the first reinstatement offer, I had transformed a potential career setback into a substantial leap forward. One afternoon, as I was leaving a particularly successful board presentation, the CEO stopped me in the hallway. "You know, Connie," he said thoughtfully, "sometimes the best executives are forged through adversity. Your experience last year could have broken many people or driven them to bitter retaliation. Instead, you turned it into an opportunity to demonstrate your true value. That ability to transform challenges into advantages is what sets exceptional leaders apart." I smiled, recognizing the truth in his observation. Sometimes being told you are not needed is exactly what you need to discover how essential you truly are. Have you ever experienced a workplace situation where you were undervalued but ultimately proved your worth? Share your story in the comments below. If this corporate comeback story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life professional journeys. Remember to hit that share button if you know someone who needs a reminder of their true value in the workplace. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes your greatest professional triumphs come after your most challenging setbacks.